Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Getting Started session on Exasol's AI Lab. For those of you that are new to AI Lab, let's talk a little bit about what it is. Exasol's AI Lab is a development environment for building, testing, and implementing AI workloads on Exasol. AI Lab uses Jupyter notebooks and various other utilities and is pre-populated with sample workflows to get you started quickly with AI and ML applications using Exasol. Now today, we're going to talk about getting started with Exasol and AI Lab. So by the end of this video, you're going to be able to understand the installation options for AI Lab, locate the AI Lab documentation, install AI Lab locally on your computer using Docker. Today, we'll be working off of a Mac. You'll install a local Exasol instance also using Docker. You're going to configure AI Lab and talk through how to set up the utilities associated with it. And finally, you'll connect AI Lab to your Exasol instance and create a new schema using the two platforms together. Now, we have a couple different install options for AI Lab, and these are all explained on our GitHub repository documentation. First, you can install AI Lab as an Amazon Machine Image, or AMI. Second, you can install AI Lab as a Docker image. This is what we're going to be doing today. If you choose to install AI Lab as a Docker image, you have two additional options. You can connect AI Lab to an existing external Exasol instance, say your test or prod Exasol instance that your organization already uses, or you can set up a new local Exasol instance via Docker for testing purposes. That's what we're going to be doing today. Finally, you can choose to set up AI Lab on a virtual machine. Now, before we get started, a couple prerequisites for this tutorial. Again, these are all covered in our documentation. Like I mentioned, we're going to be installing on a Mac today, so if you're following along, it'll probably help if you're using a Mac. We're also going to provide Windows tutorials as well, so stay tuned. Both are supported. And you just want to make sure that your system meets the system requirements. As you guessed it, those are all listed in the documentation. It helps if you're comfortable using terminal. We're going to be running a few commands on terminal. And finally, you need to have Docker installed locally. I find that using the Docker desktop app is the easiest for me. So if you're comfortable using that, that's what we'll be using today. Let's get started by checking out the documentation for Exasol's AI Lab. The easiest way to find this is by going to our GitHub repository. There's a ton of valuable information here for you to read through as you're getting started with AI Lab. And where I want to start is with the different editions available for download. As you recall, we have these three different flavors or installation options, and I'm going to choose the Docker edition. I could read more about Docker and the installation process and sort of the background technology here if I want to learn more. I'm actually ready to dive right in. Now, this is where terminal comes in. Our GitHub documentation tells you exactly what steps to take to get AI Lab set up using terminal. And the first thing you need to do is define a few environment variables that we're going to use to specify some details about the Docker image. You can copy those directly from here. I'm going to open up terminal, paste those, and hit enter. Next, remember we have two options. We can either set up AI Lab with a connection to an external Exasol database, or we can set up AI Lab with an integrated Exasol Docker DB. Now, for testing purposes today, I want to start with an integrated Exasol Docker DB. So that's going to install both AI Lab and an Exasol instance that I can test with. Now note that this is going to take a little bit longer to run because we're installing, again, both AI Lab and a full Exasol instance. So let's copy this command. Now we're going to run it. Now, if this is your first time running this command, what's going to happen in the background is machine is going to pull all of the associated images from Docker onto your local machine, which can take up a couple gigs of space. And all of that is listed on the GitHub page and on the Docker page as well. If this is your first time, this can take a couple minutes for that full download to pull. Now, the reason it'll take a few minutes is because you're pulling, again, both the AI Lab image as well as the full Exasol image. So that's a decent amount of information there. If you're starting from scratch like me, you might want to take a few minutes, go grab a cup of coffee, and come back for the next step. At this point, I like to open up Docker Desktop. Now, once the download is complete and that Docker image is running, I can see that instance running here in my containers section. We can see the version of AI Lab that's running, and next, most important step, is how to actually access AI Lab now that it's up and running. This navigates me to the IP, which is my local IP, and the port on which AI Lab is accessible. Now we're going to enter the password. Now at this point, take a look back at your terminal, and you're going to see a couple of key pieces of information. One of those is the default password for AI Lab, and that is AI Lab. In another tutorial, we'll talk about how to change that password to improve the security of this environment. So we can enter that password here and go ahead and log in. Fantastic. Welcome to AI Lab. Now, there's a ton of information here to explain how to use AI Lab, and feel free to explore and sort of follow your own path and adventure here, depending on what you're trying to learn. But before you do that, there are a couple key steps that we need to take to make sure everything is configured and ready to go. So let's start with the configuration workbook. Now, actually running this configuration workbook is pretty straightforward because we've written everything for you. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up that connection to the credential storage, which lives within AI Lab. So this is another password that you're going to use to access the content that you create in AI Lab. Next, we're going to load some UI functions and some additional utilities. And now we're going to specify which Exasol instance we want to connect to. Now remember, we want to use the Docker DB instance. That's this first one. Like we learned before, you can also connect AI Lab to an existing on-prem Exasol database and to our Exasol SaaS edition as well. Now for the main configuration. This is where I specify what I want the hardware underneath my Exasol instance to look like and the default schema. I'm going to leave this all as the default setting and save. Now we're going to start the Exasol database. Since this is my first time, I'm going to get a notice saying it has not been created. If you're coming back to your setup here and you've already run these steps, it'll prompt you to start the instance since it's already been created. Now, hitting this button is actually going to kick off another process to spin up another Docker image containing the Exasol instance. So if I want to monitor how that's working, I can hop on over to my Docker desktop app, and I can see now that that Exasol database container is up and running. Fantastic. Now, to test that AI Lab can talk to the Exasol instance that we just created, we're going to run a simple script here to create a new schema. And this is that final piece where we're connecting AI Lab as the development and workshop environment to our Exasol instance. Once these two can talk to each other, then the real magic happens. Fantastic. The output here says the schema was created, so that confirms that the AI Lab environment that I have here was able to talk to my Exasol instance. So that sets us up well to go and dive into the next series of tutorials to do even more cool stuff with Exasol and AI Lab. So let's summarize real quick. After today's tutorial, you now understand the AI Lab installation options. You can easily locate our AI Lab documentation via a GitHub page. You know how to install AI Lab locally on a Mac using Docker, and how to install a local Exasol instance using Docker. And you can configure AI Lab and set up all of the appropriate utilities it needs to run. And finally, you can connect AI Lab to that Exasol instance and create a new schema to validate that connection. Super exciting, and this sets us up for even more awesome stuff with Exasol and AI Lab. So stay tuned for more of our tutorials, including loading data, running machine learning scripts, building your first UDF, and much, much more. Thank you all very much.